There's a force within you that, when awakened and directed, can transform your presence into something almost magnetic. An energy Napoleon Hill discovered to be the secret behind history's most successful men, yet modern society conspires to have you squander daily. Are you ready to discover why some men radiate a presence that attracts opportunity, achievement, and respect, while others go unnoticed, lost in the mediocrity of a purposeless life? The answer lies in the most primal and powerful force inhabiting your body, your sexual energy. But not in the way you've been taught to think about it, not as an animalistic urge to be hastily satisfied, but as a creative force, an inner flame capable of forging destinies and transforming realities. What you're about to discover goes against everything the modern world has taught you about pleasure, masculinity, and success. We live in an age where instant gratification is sold as freedom, where compulsive masturbation is normalized as healthy, where men are conditioned to drain their vital force in fleeting moments of indulgence. But there's an ancestral truth that ancient masters knew, that Napoleon Hill rediscovered while studying the wealthiest and most influential men of his time, and that today remains hidden amidst the noise of a society that profits from your weakness. This truth is simple and devastating. The man who learns to transmute his sexual energy into higher purpose not only changes his own life, but becomes a magnet for all he desires to achieve. He develops a personal magnetism that can't be faked, a presence that can't be bought, an inner strength that can't be destroyed. But to understand this inner alchemy, we must first deconstruct the lies you've believed about yourself. From a young age, you've been bombarded with messages that taught you to view your sexuality as something dirty, separate from the sacred, disconnected from your dreams and ambitions. You were told your impulses were merely biology, your sexual needs purely physical, that satisfying them quickly and secretly was the most healthy way to handle them. This is one of the greatest betrayals ever perpetrated against male potential, because your sexual energy isn't just biology, it's pure creativity in its rawest form. It's the same force that created you, that moves civilizations, that builds empires and destroys limitations. When you squander it in moments of empty pleasure, you're literally draining the fuel that could power your greatest dreams. Napoleon Hill discovered this after interviewing over 500 successful men over 2 decades. He noticed an undeniable pattern. The men who achieved the greatest successes were those who had learned to control and direct their sexual energy. Not to repress it like ascetic monks, but to understand it as the driving force behind every significant achievement. Hill called this process sexual transmutation, the art of transforming sexual energy into creative energy, into personal magnetism, into the power of accomplishment. He observed that when a man stops dissipating this force unconsciously and begins to channel it consciously, something extraordinary happens. His mind becomes clearer, his mind becomes clearer. His presence becomes more compelling. His ability to influence and inspire others multiplies exponentially. But here's what Hill didn't fully explain, and what you need to understand urgently. This transmutation doesn't happen by chance. It requires you to confront the deepest shadow of your own psyche. It requires you to acknowledge that behind every compulsive urge lies an unhealed emotional wound, an existential void you try to fill with instant gratification. Think for a moment, when you feel the urgent need for masturbation, what are you really seeking? Physical pleasure, or are you running away from something deeper? Loneliness, anxiety, fear, frustration, feelings of inadequacy? You're actually trying to emotionally medicate a pain that pleasure can never fully cure. This is the first portal to transformation, recognizing that your sexual compulsion isn't about sex. It's about power. It's about control. It's about a desperate attempt to feel you have dominion over something in your life, even if it's only over your own body for a few minutes. But this illusory control actually leaves you more enslaved, more dependent, weaker with each repetition. True alchemy begins when you stop running from this energy and start engaging with it. When you feel the urge rise, instead of automatically satisfying it, you ask a different question: what is this energy trying to tell me? What power does it contain that I'm wasting? How can I honor it in a way that makes me stronger, not weaker? This shift in perspective transforms everything, because you begin to realize that intense energy, that inner fire you used to quickly extinguish, is actually poor fuel for your projects, your dreams, your evolution. It's the raw material of creation, waiting to be shaped by your consciousness and directed by your will. The ancients knew this. That's why tantric traditions speak of sex as a gateway to the sacred. That's why medieval alchemists use sexual symbolism to describe the transmutation of the soul. That's why Napoleon Hill discovered that the most successful men were those who had mastered this energy, not become its slaves. But mastering doesn't mean repressing. It means integrating. It means acknowledging that you possess an extraordinary life force and consciously choosing how to direct it. When you make that choice, when you cease being a passive consumer of pleasure and become an active creator of power, something magical happens to your presence. People start to notice something different about you. You radiate a confidence that isn't faked, because it comes from a place of true self-mastery. You develop a mental clarity that cuts through the confusion, because your energy isn't constantly being dissipated. You manifest a natural magnetism that attracts opportunities, relationships, and success, because you're no longer leaking your life force into fleeting pleasures. This magnetism isn't mystical, it's practical. When you retain and transmute your sexual energy, your body produces different hormonal levels. Your testosterone stabilizes at higher levels. Your dopamine doesn't get constantly depleted by artificial pleasure high. Your nervous system learns to tolerate creative tension instead of always seeking immediate relief. You literally become a biochemically different person. But the transformation goes far beyond the physical. It reaches the deepest layers of your psyche, where your most primal fears and your highest potentials reside. Because when you stop using pleasure as escape, you're forced to confront what you were running from. And in that confrontation with your own shadow, you discover treasures you never knew you possessed. You discover that your need for external validation drastically diminishes when you learn to consciously approve of your own choices. You realize that your social anxiety dissolves when you're no longer carrying the secret shame of compulsive habits. You notice that your ability to concentrate and focus multiplies when your mind isn't constantly divided between your goals and your impulses. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognizes the truth in these words. It's because there's a part of you that's tired of living a half-life, of squandering your potential on empty gratifications, of being less than you could be. And if you want to go deeper on this journey of transformation, if you want to discover the practical secrets that can accelerate your evolution, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Because what I share here isn't just philosophical theories, but concrete tools, specific exercises, and insights that can literally reprogram your relationship with your own life force. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. your future, transformed self will thank you for making this decision today. Now, let's dive deeper into the mechanics of this transmutation. Napoleon Hill discovered that there are specific levels in this process of transforming sexual energy into personal power. The first level is purely physical, when you simply stop dissipating your energy through compulsive habits. This alone produces noticeable changes in your vitality, mental clarity, and physical presence. But the second level is where the real magic happens. It's when you learn to take that retained energy and consciously direct it towards your most important goals. This isn't metaphor, it's a concrete practice. When you feel sexual energy accumulating in your body, instead of releasing it through pleasure, you mentally pull it upwards through your spine and focus it on your ambitions, your projects, your visions. Tantric masters called this raising the Kundalini energy. Alchemists called it turning lead into gold. Napoleon Hill called it sexual transmutation. They were all describing the same process, the art of transforming vital energy into creative power. This process works because your sexual energy and your creative energy are fundamentally the same thing. Both arise from the same source, your primordial life force. The difference lies only in the direction you choose to give them. You can direct them downwards through your physical body in pursuit of momentary pleasure, or you can direct them upwards through your consciousness in pursuit of lasting achievements. When you consistently choose the second option, you develop what Hill called personal magnetism. This magnetism isn't superficial charm or learned persuasion techniques. It's a natural radiation of personal power that comes from someone who has mastered the most primal force of their own nature. People sense this instinctively. They can't explain exactly what it is, but there's something about your presence that draws them in. You become the kind of man who walks into a room and the conversations naturally turn to you, not because you're trying to command attention, but because you radiate a focused and directed energy that is magnetically attractive. This is one of the great ironies of sexual transmutation. When you stop compulsively chasing sexual pleasure, you actually become more sexually attractive. Because true sexual magnetism doesn't come from techniques or physical appearance. It comes from personal power. And personal power comes from self-mastery. But here's where many men get confused. They think sexual transmutation means permanent celibacy or total repression of impulses. This couldn't be further from the truth. Sexual transmutation is about consciousness, not abstinence. It's about choice, not deprivation. A man who has transmuted his sexual energy doesn't avoid sex, he experiences it in a completely different way. When he chooses to express his sexuality, it does so from a place of fullness, not need. He offers his sexual energy as a gift, not as a desperate attempt to fill an inner void. This difference radically transforms not only his sex life, but all of his relationships. Because when you don't need anything from anyone to feel complete, you can genuinely give and receive love in a much deeper and more authentic way. This brings us to the third level of sexual transmutation, the spiritual transformation. Because when you master this primal force within you, you don't just change your practical life, you change your own identity. You cease being someone who is commanded by impulses and become someone who commands impulses. You evolve from a consumer of experiences to a creator of realities. This transformation is profoundly spiritual because it connects you with the most sacred aspect of your nature, your capacity for conscious choice. The moment you recognize that you possess the power to say no to a primal urge in favor of a higher purpose, you awaken to your true nature as a conscious and creative being. And here's where we find the deepest connection to Napoleon Hill's teachings on success and wealth. Hell discovered that all truly successful men possessed one common quality, the ability to postpone immediate gratification in favor of greater rewards in the future. They could resist the temptation of easy pleasure because they had something more important to live for. Sexual transmutation is the ultimate training ground for this quality, because if you can resist the most primal and powerful lures of your nature, the sexual impulse, you can resist any temptation that stands between you and your goals. You develop a willpower that becomes applicable to all areas of your life. This explains why Hill observed that the wealthiest men were often those who had learned to control their sexual energy. It wasn't coincidence, it was cause and effect. The same mental muscle that allows you to control sexual impulses is what allows you to resist impulsive spending, persevere through hardship, and maintain focus on long-term goals, even when the world around you is offering constant distractions. But the journey of transmutation isn't easy. It requires you to confront aspects of yourself that you'd rather ignore. It demands that you question patterns of behavior that have become automatic. It requires you to develop a completely new relationship with discomfort, tension, and unmeturges. In the early stages of this journey, you'll likely experience what psychologists call an extinction burst, a temporary intensification of the impulses you're trying to control. This happens because your subconscious mind, accustomed to old patterns, desperately tries to keep them alive through stronger and more frequent signals. This phase is crucial, and many men give up right here, thinking the process isn't working. But in reality, this intensification is a sign that you're making progress. Your old neural pathways are being challenged, and they're fighting for survival. Persisting through this phase is where the true transformation begins. This is where you'll discover inner resources you didn't even know you possessed. You'll learn that you can tolerate discomfort without collapsing, that you can feel tension without immediately seeking relief, that you can hold intense energy within you and use it as fuel for creation instead of dissipating it in consumption. This process of inner strengthening is analogous to muscle development. When you exercise a muscle, you deliberately stress it so that it becomes stronger. Similarly, when you consciously choose not to satisfy a sexual urge, you're exercising your willpower muscle, making it more robust and reliable. But here's the insight that most people miss: willpower alone isn't enough. You also need to cultivate wisdom about why you're making this choice. You need to connect your practice of transmutation with a larger vision of what you want to create in your life. Without this connection to a higher purpose, discipline becomes just disguised self-denial. That's why Napoleon Hill emphasized so much the importance of having clear and emotionally charged goals. When you know exactly what you want to create, whether it's wealth, influence, deep relationships, contribution to the world, sexual energy naturally becomes directed toward those goals. It ceases to be a chaotic force seeking satisfaction and becomes an organized force seeking manifestation. This conscious redirection of energy is where you'll discover the most practical and immediate aspects of sexual transmutation. When you accumulate a sexual energy without dissipating it, and consciously focus it on an important project, you'll experience levels of creativity, focus, and productivity you didn't know were possible. Artists, writers, entrepreneurs, and innovators throughout history have discovered this intuitively. Many of history's greatest creative geniuses were known for periods of intense celibacy during their most productive phases. They understood, perhaps unconsciously, that there's a direct connection between retained sexual energy and creative bursts. But you don't have to be a genius to apply these principles. Any man can experience this transmutation in his own life. The secret is to start spoiled with controlled experiments instead of trying drastic changes that are unlikely to be sustainable. Start by choosing a project that genuinely inspires you, something that makes your eyes light up when you think about it. It could be a business you want to start, a book you want to write, a skill you want to master, a relationship you want to deepen. The key is that it should be something that resonates deeply with your highest values and aspirations. Then, when you feel sexual energy arise, instead of automatically seeking physical satisfaction, pause for a moment, breathe deeply and visualize this energy as a golden light in your body. Mentally, pull this light upward through your spine to the top of your head. Then project it toward your chosen project. Visualize this energy fueling and accelerating the manifestation of your goals. This may seem abstract at first, but with practice, you'll begin to notice concrete changes. Your motivation to work on the project will increase. Your creative ideas will multiply. Your ability to maintain focus for extended periods will expand. These aren't empty promises. They are documented results that thousands of men have experienced when consistently applying these principles. But the deepest transformation happens on an even more fundamental level, in your relationship with your own masculinity. Modern society has conflated masculinity with consumption of pleasure, of products, of experiences, of external validation. The modern man has been taught to be a perpetual consumer, always seeking something outside himself to feel complete and powerful. Sexual transmutation completely flips this paradigm. It transforms you from a consumer to a creator. Instead of constantly seeking external gratification, you learn to generate inner satisfaction through self-mastery. Instead of relying on external stimuli to feel alive, you awaken to the natural vitality that's always been within you. This shift from consumer to creator is perhaps the most liberating transformation a man can experience, because when you don't need anything external to feel powerful, you become truly free to choose relationships based on love rather than need. Free to pursue goals based on passion rather than desperation. Free to express your true nature without a constant need for external validation. This inner freedom is what Napoleon Hill recognized in the most successful men he studied. They had achieved a level of inner security and self-mastery that made them magnetic to opportunities and people. They didn't chase success desperately. Success was naturally drawn to them because they had cultivated the internal qualities that success recognizes and rewards. And here we arrive at the most beautiful paradox of sexual transmutation. When you stop compulsively chasing what you want, you naturally become the type of person who attracts what you want. When you stop desperately seeking pleasure, you develop the presence that makes others want to give you pleasure. When you stop desperately seeking success, you develop the qualities that make success inevitable. This happens because desperation repels while confidence attracts. And true confidence, not arrogance or bravado, but deep, quiet confidence, can only come from self-mastery. You cannot fake the energy of a man who has conquered his own impulses and redirected them toward noble purposes. That energy is unmistakable and irresistible. As you progress on this journey of transmutation, you'll notice that your relationship with all forms of desire begins to transform. You'll still want things, success, love, experiences, material goods, but you'll want them from a place of power rather than need. You'll pursue them as expressions of your creativity, rather than attempts to fill internal voids. This shift transforms everything. Your career becomes an expression of your values, rather than just a way to pay the bills. Your relationships become opportunities for mutual growth rather than desperate attempts to avoid loneliness. Your spiritual life becomes a genuine exploration of meaning rather than a search for comfort in uncertainty. But perhaps the most profound transformation is in your relationship with time itself. When you're no longer constantly dissipating your energy through compulsive behaviors, you suddenly have access to vast reservoirs of time and attention that you didn't even know existed. Hours that were previously lost to mindless scrolling, compulsive behaviors, and mental fog suddenly become available for meaningful pursuits. This expanded relationship with time is one of the most practical benefits of sexual transmutation. You literally get your life back. Days feel longer because you're more present in them. Projects progress faster because your attention is more focused. Relationships deepen because you're more emotionally available. Napoleon Hill understood this when he wrote that the most successful men seem to have access to more hours in their day than everyone else. It wasn't that they had supernatural powers, it was that they had learned to use their energy more efficiently by not constantly leaking it through unconscious behaviors. As we approach the culmination of this exploration, it's important to understand that sexual transmutation is not a destination but a journey. It's not about achieving some final state of perfect self-control, but about continuously choosing consciousness over compulsion, creation over consumption, power over pleasure-seeking. There will be setbacks. There will be moments when you fall back into old patterns. This is not failure. It's part of the process. What matters is not perfection, but direction. Each time you choose to transmute rather than dissipate, each time you redirect impulse or purpose, you strengthen the neural pathways that support your evolution. And here's what will happen as you continue on this path. You'll begin to notice that your very presence starts to affect others differently. People will sense something changed about you, even if they can't articulate what it is. You'll find that conversations naturally turn deeper when you're involved. Others will seek your opinion, your guidance, your energy. This is the magnetism that Napoleon Hill wrote about. It's not a mysterious force. It's the natural result of a man who has learned to contain and direct his own power rather than constantly leaking it. People are drawn to power, but they're especially drawn to power that's controlled and purposeful rather than chaotic and self-serving. As you embody this controlled power more fully, you'll discover that success in all areas of life becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Because you've developed this fundamental quality that underlies all lasting achievement, the ability to choose long-term fulfillment over short-term gratification. This choice, this moment-by-moment decision to honor your highest self rather than your lowest impulse, is where your true manhood is forged. Not in conquest of others, but in conquest of yourself. Not in accumulation of experiences, but in cultivation of character. Not in satisfaction of every desire, but in the wisdom to know which desires serve your evolution and which ones diminish it. And so we arrive at the end of this journey through the mysteries of sexual transmutation, but for you, this is just the first page of a much larger story waiting to be written. The story of a man who discovered the best-kept secret of personal power, that the strength you seek outside yourself has always existed within you, waiting only to be recognized, honored, and consciously directed. Napoleon Hill dedicated his life to studying success and discovered that all history's great achievers shared the single quality. They had learned to transform sexual energy into creative energy, primal drive into elevated purpose, compulsive desire into focused power. Now you have access to the same knowledge that transformed ordinary men into legends. But knowledge without action is just intellectual entertainment. True transformation happens when you close this video, look in the mirror, and make the decision that will define the rest of your life. Will you remain a slave to impulses that keep you ordinary, or will you become master of the forces that will make you extraordinary? This choice isn't philosophical, it's viscerally practical. Tonight, when the impulse rises, you have two options. Follow the familiar path that leads to momentary gratification and subsequent emptiness, or choose the path of the inner warrior that leads to lasting power and profound fulfillment. The man you can become, confident, magnetic, creative, prosperous, spiritually awakened, is waiting on the other side of this choice. Is not a distant fantasy, but an immediate possibility dependent only on your courage to cross the portal of conscious transmutation. Remember, you're not just retaining semen, you're retaining power. You're not just controlling impulses, you're forging character. You're not just changing habits, you're being reborn as the higher version of who you were always meant to be. The fire of sexual energy burning within you right now is not your enemy. It's your greatest ally, waiting to be transformed into light, into creativity, into magnetism, into success. Honor this force, direct it consciously. Allow it to elevate you to the stature of men, who not only dream of greatness but manifest it through conscious self-mastery. Your journey of transmutation begins now, in this moment, with this next choice. Choose wisely, because this choice doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone around you who will benefit from the presence of a truly awakened man in their lives. The future awaits you not as you are today, but as you can become through the sacred alchemy of sexual transmutation. Accept this invitation to greatness. Your higher self is waiting on the other side of the transformation.